The tears streaming down my mother's face were perfectly timed as always. She stood in the kitchen of what she believed was her house, clutching grocery receipts like evidence of martyrdom, her voice breaking with practiced precision as she delivered her monthly performance about family sacrifice and financial hardship. "Rachel, after everything your father and I have sacrificed for you over the years, you won't help us with basic necessities like groceries?" Mom's voice quavered with the particular blend of hurt and disappointment she'd perfected during my childhood. "We're not asking for luxuries. We're asking for food." I stood by the granite countertop, granite I'd paid for during the kitchen renovation 2 years ago, and felt the familiar knot of guilt and resentment tighten in my stomach. The groceries she needed help with weren't basic necessities. The receipts she clutched showed organic produce, imported cheeses, premium steaks, and wine that cost more per bottle than most people spent on groceries in a week. "How much do you need, Mom?" I asked quietly, already reaching for my phone. $1,500 should cover us for the month," she said, her tears stopping as quickly as they'd started. "You know how expensive everything has gotten. $1,500 for monthly groceries for 2 people. My parents had somehow convinced themselves, and tried to convince me, that their gourmet eating habits constituted basic survival needs that their struggling daughter should subsidize out of gratitude for their sacrifices. I opened my banking app and initiated the wire transfer, watching my savings account balance drop by another $1,500. The account I kept specifically for family demands now showed a balance of $3,200. Money I maintained to preserve the fiction that I was barely getting by financially while my real wealth remained hidden in investment accounts they knew nothing about. "Thank you, sweetheart," Mom said, her tone shifting to satisfied relief. "You're such a good daughter. Your father and I raised you right. Raised me right." The phrase that justified every financial demand, every guilt trip, every manipulation disguised as family love. According to my parents' narrative, they had sacrificed everything to give me opportunities, and my success, however modest they believed it to be, was evidence of their superior parenting that deserved ongoing financial gratitude. Dad emerged from his home office, the converted bedroom that I'd paid to have professionally renovated with built-in shelving and high-end electronics. He was holding a stack of bills and wearing the expression that meant another family financial crisis was about to be announced. "Rachel, we need to talk about the property taxes," he said, settling into the leather chair I'd purchased for their living room. "The county assessment went up again. We're looking at an additional $4,000 this year. Property taxes. On the house they believed they owned but I'd been quietly paying for 3 years. The house they thought they'd inherited from my grandmother but had actually been purchased by me through a family trust when Grandma's estate went into probate. $4,000 is a lot," I said carefully. "It is, but that's the price of living in a nice neighborhood," Dad replied with the casual entitlement of someone discussing expenses he expected someone else to cover. "Properties like this hold their value because of the location and amenities. Properties like this. The 4-bedroom colonial with the updated kitchen, renovated bathrooms, professional landscaping, and finished basement that I'd paid for while they lived rent-free and treated me like the financially struggling daughter who should be grateful for their guidance. Dad, how are you planning to cover the property tax increase?" His expression shifted slightly, the confident homeowner facade cracking to reveal the financial reality underneath. "Well, that's where we hoped you might be able to help. Just until my consulting business picks up again." Dad's consulting business. The vague entrepreneurial venture he'd started 6 months ago that generated approximately zero income but provided convenient justification for why he couldn't contribute to household expenses. Meanwhile, Mom's part-time retail job barely covered her shopping habits, leaving them completely dependent on my financial contributions while maintaining the fiction that they were financially independent homeowners. "How much help are we talking about?" "The full $4,000 preferably. And maybe a little extra for some maintenance projects we've been putting off." "Maintenance projects?" "On the house I owned, paid for by me for the benefit of people who treated me like their financial safety net while claiming to be independent adults managing their own property." I nodded and made a mental note to transfer the money, adding it to the running total I kept of family financial demands. This month. Groceries, $1,500, property taxes, $4,000, maintenance, $500, utilities I'd quietly been paying through automatic transfers, $800. Total monthly family subsidies, $6,800. My parents lived in a house I owned, ate food I paid for, and enjoyed amenities I funded while lecturing me about financial responsibility and gratitude for their sacrifices. The sacrifices they'd made for me were detailed and frequently recounted. Working overtime to pay for my college applications, taking out a second mortgage to help with my education expenses, supporting me emotionally through the challenges of building my career. According to family mythology, their current financial struggles were directly related to the investments they'd made in my future. What they didn't know, what I'd carefully kept hidden for 3 years, was that I'd paid off their second mortgage within 6 months of graduation, covered all my education expenses through scholarships and student loans they'd never seen, and built a financial planning consultancy that generated over $400,000 annually. My parents believed I worked as a junior financial analyst making $48,000 yearly. They had no idea that Meridian Wealth Management, the company they thought I worked for, was actually my company with clients across 3 states and investment portfolios worth millions. The fiction had become necessary when I realized that revealing my true financial situation would transform me from grateful daughter to family ATM overnight. Instead, I maintained modest living arrangements, drove a practical car, and lived like someone making $48,000 while secretly owning property worth $2.3 million and maintaining investment accounts they couldn't imagine. My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney, David Morrison, who specialized in estate planning and property law. "Rachel, need to discuss the property transfer documentation we discussed. Some complications have arisen with the family trust structure. Can you meet tomorrow?" David. Complications. David had been helping me navigate the complex legal situation of owning property that my parents believed they'd inherited. The house had actually been part of my grandmother's estate debt, which I'd quietly purchased through a trust to prevent foreclosure while allowing my parents to continue living there. "Rachel," Mom's voice interrupted my thoughts, "you look stressed. Are you having money problems again?" Money problems. In my family's narrative, I was perpetually on the verge of financial crisis, barely managing to help them while struggling with my own expenses. The irony of a millionaire being asked about money problems by people living rent-free in her property was almost too absurd to process. "I'm fine, Mom. Just work stress." "Well, don't let work consume you like your father did when he was building his career. That's how people burn out and make poor financial decisions." Poor financial decisions. Like buying a house for your parents to live in while they charge you for groceries and act like independent homeowners. Like maintaining a fiction about your income to prevent financial exploitation while providing that financial support anyway. That evening, I sat in my actual apartment, a luxury 2-bedroom space downtown that my parents had never seen, and opened my laptop to review the financial documentation David had requested. The legal complexity of my family situation was staggering. I owned the house through Meridian Family Trust, which I'd established to purchase the property when my grandmother's estate faced foreclosure. My parents believed they'd inherited the house from Grandma, but the inheritance had actually been debt that would have resulted in them losing the property. Rather than explain the financial reality and deal with their pride and potential demands for additional support, I'd quietly purchased the house and allowed them to believe the inheritance story. For 3 years, they'd lived as homeowners while I paid mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance through various indirect channels. The ethical complexity was significant. I was lying to my parents about property ownership while they were unknowingly living in my house and asking me to help with expenses for property I owned. But revealing the truth would likely result in them feeling entitled to even more financial support, or worse, attempting to legally claim ownership based on their years of residency. My phone rang at 10:30 p.m. Dad's number. "Rachel, I've been thinking about the property tax situation. $4,000 is really just the beginning. We should probably budget for ongoing increases, plus the maintenance items we discussed." "What kind of maintenance?" "Well, the roof will need replacement within a few years. The HVAC system is getting old. The driveway needs resurfacing. When you own property like this, you have to think long-term about capital improvements." When you own property like this, Dad was planning capital improvements for property he didn't own, funded by money from the actual owner whom he treated like a financial burden the family generously supported. "Dad, those are significant expenses." "They are, but that's what property ownership entails. Good thing we raised a daughter who understands family responsibility." Family responsibility. My responsibility to fund improvements on property I owned for the benefit of people who believed they owned it while treating me like the struggling family member who should be grateful for opportunities to help. I'll think about it, I said, ending the call. The next morning I met David Morrison in his law office downtown. His practice specialized in complex family property disputes, and his assessment of my situation was both professional and deeply concerning. "Rachel, the legal complications are escalating," David said, spreading documents across his conference table. "Your parents have been making inquiries about refinancing the property." Refinancing. They approached 3 different lenders about cash-out refinancing, claiming ownership based on inheritance documentation that doesn't actually exist. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of documentation? They've apparently created or obtained fraudulent inheritance papers suggesting your grandmother left them the property free and clear. They're trying to borrow against equity in a house they don't own. Is that legal? It's mortgage fraud if they succeed. The fact that they don't actually own the property makes any loan application fraudulent, regardless of their intent. David pulled out additional paperwork. There's more. They've contacted a real estate agent about listing the property for sale. What? They want to downsize and use the proceeds to fund your father's business expansion and your mother's early retirement. They're planning to sell your house and pocket the proceeds. The room spun slightly as the implications became clear. My parents were planning to commit real estate fraud by selling property they didn't own, keeping the proceeds, and leaving me responsible for a mortgage I'd never authorized. David, what are my options? Immediate legal intervention to prevent fraudulent sale, or disclosure of actual ownership with documentation of their attempted fraud. What would disclosure look like? We'd need to inform them that you own the property, provide documentation of the purchase and ownership structure, and potentially file criminal complaints if they've already submitted fraudulent loan applications. I thought about the groceries, the property taxes, the maintenance requests. About 3 years of living like a struggling analyst while subsidizing people who were planning to steal my house and sell it for their personal benefit. Let's schedule disclosure. Rachel, once they learn you own the house, there's no going back to the current arrangement. They'll either be grateful for your generosity or feel entitled to complete financial support. Are you prepared for either reaction? I'm prepared for them to face consequences for planning to commit real estate fraud. That afternoon, David and I sat in my parents' kitchen. My kitchen in my house, with legal documents that would reveal the true ownership structure and their attempted fraudulent activities. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," David began formally, "we need to discuss the ownership status of this property and some concerning financial activities that have come to our attention." Dad's confident homeowner expression faltered slightly. "What kind of activities?" "Attempts to refinance and sell property that you don't legally own." "Don't own?" Mom's voice pitched higher. "This house was inherited from Rachel's grandmother." David pulled out the property deed and trust documentation. "Actually, this property is owned by Meridian Family Trust, with Rachel Henderson as the sole beneficiary and decision-maker." Silence. My parents stared at the documents, their faces cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing realization. "That's impossible," Dad said finally. "We inherited this house. We have documents." "Mr. Henderson, the documents you have are fraudulent. Your mother-in-law's estate was in debt when she passed. Rachel purchased this property through a family trust to prevent foreclosure and allow you to continue living here." Mom turned to me with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Rachel, what is he talking about?" "Mom, I bought the house 3 years ago. You and Dad were about to lose it to foreclosure. I purchased it through a trust so you could keep living here. But you're struggling financially. You can barely afford to help with groceries." "I'm not struggling financially, Mom. I own a consulting company. I've been paying for this house and the taxes and the maintenance, and helping with your expenses because I thought you needed help." Dad found his voice. "Rachel, how much money do you have?" "Enough to buy houses for family members who then ask me to help with grocery money." The truth was settling in, and their expressions were shifting from confusion to realization to something that looked suspiciously like calculation. "So when we asked you to help with expenses," Mom began, "you were asking me to help pay for my own house while you lived in it rent-free." David interrupted the family discussion. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, We also need to address the mortgage applications and real estate inquiries you've made. What about them? Dad's voice was defensive. Attempting to obtain loans or sell property you don't own constitutes fraud. We have documentation of 3 mortgage applications and a listing agreement you signed with a real estate agent. We didn't know. Mom protested. We thought we owned the house. Mrs. Henderson, the mortgage applications require property ownership verification. Signing those documents without actual ownership is a crime regardless of your knowledge level. I watched my parents process the information. They'd been living in my house while asking me to help with expenses for that house, and they'd nearly committed federal crimes by trying to borrow against and sell property that belonged to me. Rachel, Dad's tone shifted to the manipulation mode I recognized from childhood. We can work this out. You're our daughter. We raised you, supported you, made sacrifices for your education and success. Dad, what specific sacrifices did you make for my education? We took out a second mortgage to help with college expenses. I paid off that mortgage 3 years ago. What other sacrifices? We supported you emotionally. We gave you opportunities. By asking me to help pay for the house I own while you live in it for free? David cleared his throat. We need to address the immediate legal issues. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, you'll need to contact the lenders and real estate agent to withdraw any pending applications. Continuing with fraudulent transactions could result in federal charges. Mom started crying again, but these tears seemed more genuine than her grocery money performance. Rachel, I don't understand. If you have money, why did you let us struggle? Why didn't you tell us? Mom, you weren't struggling. You were living rent-free in a house I paid for, asking me to help with luxury groceries while planning to steal my property and sell it. We weren't stealing. We thought it was ours. Did you think the groceries were yours too? The property taxes? The maintenance costs? The questions hung in the air because we all knew the answers. They'd been treating my financial support as their entitlement while maintaining that they were independent homeowners who occasionally needed help from their struggling daughter. Dad tried a different approach. Rachel, family members help each other. Your success is partly due to our support and guidance. It's natural that we'd benefit from the investments we made in your future. Dad, show me receipts for investments you made in my future. It's not about receipts. It's about emotional support, guidance, the foundation we provided. The foundation you provided doesn't justify asking me to pay property taxes on my own house while you try to sell it without my knowledge. David interrupted again. We need to resolve the immediate legal situation. Rachel, do you want to formalize a rental agreement, or would you prefer they find alternative housing? The question I'd been avoiding for 3 years. Did I want to continue subsidizing my parents' lifestyle while they treated me like their personal bank account, or did I want them to experience the financial reality of adult independence? I want them to understand that living in someone else's house means being a tenant, not an owner. And tenants who try to sell their landlord's property face eviction and criminal charges. What does that mean? Mom asked. It means you can sign a lease and pay market rate rent, or you can find somewhere else to live. But you can't continue treating me like your financial support system while planning to commit fraud with my property. The room fell silent except for the sound of Mom crying. Again, but this time with the genuine distress of someone whose comfortable fiction had been destroyed by reality. Dad's voice was barely controlled anger. Rachel, you're destroying this family over money. Dad, you're the one who tried to sell my house without telling me. I'm just protecting myself from people who apparently think my generosity makes me a pushover. David began packing up his documents. I'll prepare formal tenancy agreements based on market rates for this area. You'll have 30 days to decide whether to sign leases or vacate the property. Market rates? Mom looked panicked. What are market rates for a house like this? Approximately $4,000 monthly for a 4-bedroom property in this neighborhood. $4,000 monthly. More than twice what they'd been asking me to contribute for property taxes while living rent-free in my house. We can't afford $4,000 monthly. Dad protested. Then you'll need to find housing that matches your actual income instead of living in a house someone else pays for. That evening I sat in my actual apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Complete financial autonomy. No requests for grocery money, no property tax emergencies, no maintenance crises that required my immediate financial intervention. My phone remained quiet until 11 p.m., when Mom called with a different tone entirely. Rachel, your father and I have been talking. We had no idea about your financial situation or the property ownership. We're grateful for everything you've done. Thank you for saying that, Mom. But we're confused about why you didn't tell us the truth. We could have worked together instead of you carrying all the financial burden alone. Mom, every time I hesitated about a financial request, you and Dad lectured me about family responsibility and the sacrifices you'd made. If you'd known I was wealthy, would you have made smaller requests or larger ones? Silence. We both knew the answer. We would have expected more, she admitted quietly, and treated my wealth as family wealth while maintaining that your income was personal income. Probably. Mom, I love you and Dad. But I needed to know that you could love me without knowing my bank account balance. The past 3 years taught me that you were more interested in my financial capacity than my emotional well-being. That's not true. Mom, when was the last time you called to ask how I was feeling instead of calling to ask for money? Another long silence. Rachel, what do you want from us now? I want honest relationships based on mutual respect instead of financial manipulation. I want parents who are proud of my success instead of parents who see my success as their personal resource. 6 months later, my parents signed the lease and began paying market-rate rent for the house I owned. Dad's consulting business suddenly became profitable when he couldn't rely on my subsidies to cover basic expenses. Mom discovered she was talented at budget management when she had to manage an actual budget instead of supplementing it with requests for my help. Their rental payments covered the mortgage, taxes, and maintenance on the property, making me a legitimate landlord instead of a secret benefactor. The financial relationship became honest and transparent instead of manipulative and exploitative. 1 year later, Dad called to tell me about a promotion at his consulting firm. His voice carried genuine pride instead of the entitled expectation that had characterized our previous conversations about money. Rachel, I wanted to share some good news. The business landed a major contract, and I'll be able to give you 6 months' rent in advance. That's wonderful, Dad. It feels good to be able to contribute instead of always needing help. You were always capable of contributing, Dad. You just didn't have to while I was covering your expenses. Rachel, I owe you an apology. We treated your generosity like our entitlement, and we nearly committed crimes because we didn't understand the reality of our situation. Thank you for saying that. Your mother and I talk about it sometimes, how we convinced ourselves that asking you for money was helping you learn family responsibility, when really we were just taking advantage of your success. The admission was more valuable than any rent payment. My parents had finally acknowledged that their treatment of me had been exploitative rather than educational, manipulative rather than loving. Dad, I'm proud of your business success. And I'm proud of yours, sweetheart. I'm sorry it took us so long to say that. 2 years later, my parents purchased their own home with proceeds from Dad's successful consulting business and Mom's profitable budget management services. They moved out of my house and into a smaller property that matched their actual income and lifestyle preferences. The house I'd bought to save them from foreclosure became a rental property that generated legitimate income while my parents lived independently in a home they'd earned through their own efforts. The financial exploitation disguised as family sacrifice ended when I stopped enabling their comfortable fiction about property ownership and started requiring honest relationships based on mutual respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is stop funding their ability to avoid responsibility for their own lives. Sometimes family helping family means forcing everyone to understand who owns what and who owes what to whom. And sometimes the sacrifices people claim to have made for you are actually sacrifices you made for them, disguised by manipulation and enabled by your own generosity.